You're listening to The Sacred Sofa, a podcast that explores all things theology and therapy. My name is Grace Brown. I'm a registered psychotherapist, certified Canadian counselor, and owner of Journey with Grace Counseling Services.
And I'm Brad Watson, pastor of Nexus Church and author of the book, A Path Called Compelling. Welcome to The Sacred Sofa.
Welcome back, Brad. Good to see you. Good to see
you.
And
Yes.
welcome. Thank you. And welcome back to our listeners on the Sacred Sofa. We are so glad you're listening in with us today because we're going to dive into our Narratology series where we're exploring the theological and psychological aspects of the 7 great plot lines of story. So hopefully you were able to join us for our last episode in our intro to this series. But today we're beginning with one of the oldest and maybe the most universal storylines ever told, overcoming the monster. So with that, Brad, let's get to it.
All right, Grace, I am so excited about this series. I remember us chatting about it even last spring, getting into it, and finally we're here. So let's jump in, shall we? Like all of us, I just love stories, so it's exciting to dive into this and overcoming the monster. Like you mentioned, Grace, it might be one of the oldest, most universal storylines. There's the ancient myths to Hollywood blockbusters, from Gilgamesh and Beowulf to Jaws and Stranger Things, right? We humans have always told stories where a hero has to face down a monster of some kind that seems unbeatable. And sometimes the monster is a literal beast, right? Sometimes it's a system, a shadow, or a looming threat. But in every case, in this type of story, there's a battle, there's dangers. And there's this dramatic moment where when all hope seems lost, something shifts and the monster somehow is defeated. And here's the thing. I believe these stories, right, they stick with us generation after generation because they're not just out there stories. They're also in here. It's very relatable with some of the stuff we struggle with ourselves in our interior world. So they kind of mirror what we face in life. So if you read the Bible through the overcoming the monster lens, suddenly you begin to see it everywhere, right? Like all of a sudden there's Leviathan in Isaiah, there's David and Goliath, Moses and Pharaoh, Esther and Haman, Daniel and the lion's den. Like all of these, when you understand the monster storyline, they suddenly make sense that way. And of course, at the center of the Jesus story is the greatest battle against a monster ever, you could say. Jesus facing down evil and death and the powers of destruction. So starts to help make sense a little bit of Bible and why some of these stories stick for so long. And it's, the Bible's not just trying to give us bedtime tales. It's trying to form our imagination, right? To remind us life will confront us with monsters. Question is not if, but when. And so this storyline matters, not just as literature or myth, but I think it can become a guide for our lives, our narrative self, like we talked about last week. So, Grace, let me start with a broad question for you here. Why do you think human beings are so drawn to monster stories, whether it's the ancient myth of Gilgamesh or something like Harry Potter or Jaws? Why do we love this story, this plot line so much?
Yeah, really great question. And I myself love a good story. But Brad, I do hate a monster. I mean, you will not catch me watching or reading things from the horror genre. Nope, no, thank you. But why are we ultimately drawn to monster stories? And I believe it's for a few reasons, and I'll highlight 3 of them today. First of all, you've got the thrill seekers. Right? Sign me up for a roller coaster or even a motorcycle ride. I love that, but not a horror flick.
No.
My, amped up, adrenaline doesn't work that way in terms of horror, right? So some folks love the thrill of the feeling of fear. Least favorite month of the year for me is October because creepy is everywhere. Can't do it. I mean, everywhere already there's like all of the themes for Halloween. That's just not my vibe. That's just not my vibe. But there are thrill seekers. I think the other way that people kind of are drawn to monster stories is because monsters also speak to that great unknown and our desire to make sense of what we don't know.
Mm,
Fears of the dark secrets of the ocean bring us things like the Leviathan, the Kraken, and
mm,
Jaws.
right.
And move over Jaws because now it's time for the Meg,
Yeah,
right?
yes.
Fear of the majestic and mysterious vastness of the galaxies brings us alien movies, both
Mm,
comedic and horrifying, right? It's
mhm,
that
mhm,
unknown, and we're trying to create some sense of meaning for that. And the third reason I want to talk about is I believe that the other reason is there's this sense that we have some form of control when we can defeat the undefeatable.
mm,
We all want to believe that our courage, strength, and resilience will allow us to triumph either alone or as a part of a team,
mm,
as heroes and misfits.
mm.
We really love the idea of the misfit battling against all the odds and emerging victorious. We
Right.
got Guardians of the Galaxy, Harry Potter, a new TV series, Netflix series, Wednesday,
Mm,
right? Pick any Disney story,
right, right.
right? Right? We face the monsters for thrills, to make meaning of mystery, and for a sense of control.
That's a great psychological snapshot. And I gotta jump in. I'm totally on board with you with the horror movie thing. I was so scared after a horror movie back in 2005. I couldn't sleep that night. And so we're going to talk a little later about some horror movies, but I haven't seen them because I know
Mm-mm.
about them in theory. I just I get too scared. But I'm shocked, Grace, that October is your least favorite month. That is wow.
I love the changing leaves. I hate the zombies and vampires and
Yeah,
all
right.
the other worldly things that come out at night.
Yes, yes, yes. I hear you. That makes sense. Now, here's something I think really important for those of us traveling the Jesus path. We all have monsters to fight, and we're going to dig into that more a bit. But on the Jesus path, there's one interesting thing that I think we need to make note of off the top, and that's that the monster in our storyline of our lives is never allowed to be another human being.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And our struggle, Paul says, right, our struggle in life is not against flesh and blood, it's not against other human beings. And yet, so often in our culture, in our politics, even in our churches, it's very easy for all of us to slip into seeing people as the
Mm-hmm.
monsters.
Right, right.
We tell ourselves the monster is those people, the people we disagree with, or people we think are causing problems. It could be, conservatives, liberals, progressives, fundamentalists, whatever it is. But that's not the way of Jesus. So
Mm-hmm.
even though I want to get into this storyline, explore how it applies to our life, I just think we should start there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that it's never, we don't want to make other humans the monster. And I
Right.
think that's what sets the Jesus story apart from ideology, because with any kind of ideology, it's kind of funneled and fueled by our need for enemies. So
Mm-hmm.
Jesus' story is going to help us name some real monsters, but refuses to turn them into people. So I just wanted to point that out as we begin, but let's turn to the storyline itself. So I rewatched Jaws. It turned 50 years old. I figured a 50-year-old horror movie, I feel like I
We can handle that, right?
can handle that, and I could, and it was the end of summer, so I knew I wasn't going to be near the ocean for a long time. So hey, we're all good. But one of the things that strikes me, and I think how the plot line can inform our lives, is that trouble begins. Immediately a young woman is killed, and then a boy is killed, and then a fisherman is killed. But the whole town wants to ignore the problem
Mm.
of the shark, right? It's only the police chief at the beginning who wants to close the beach and hunt this thing down. But everyone else, at least initially, wants to ignore it. And I find that a fascinating aspect
Mm.
of how we think about our own storylines.
Mm-hmm.
There's a monster we all have to battle, but our initial impulse is to want to ignore it. Could you maybe speak to that a little bit?
For sure. And I'd first want to say I appreciate how you're speaking to the very real systems as the
Mm,
very real monsters in our lives.
mm,
And, along with you, there are many artists in the media who use metaphor and allegory to speak to these monstrous systems, whether they be political, cultural, familial, and or religious. And
mm-hmm.
so I love that you're pointing that out. I'm also thinking of our more modern activist filmmaker, Jordan Peele. If you've seen
Mm-hmm.
any of his thrillers, Get Out, Nope. Now, this one is a bit of a debate on whether it's horror or thriller genre, but did you see this summer's blockbuster Sinners? Have you seen
Okay.
that one yet?
Grace, I gotta confess, I've heard nothing but great things about Jordan Peele's movies, and I appreciate them from a distance, but
Mhm.
I'm too scared to watch them. I I
Somehow
they
I can
look
get through his.
you
Maybe
can
it's because
okay
I.
okay, maybe that's
Maybe
the
because in
confidence
my
I need.
mind it's a thriller, not a
A
horror, and it's
thriller.
not
Okay.
gratuitous,
Okay.
grossness. Maybe that's also a reason. But Jordan Peele, it's not about the monster you're actually facing. He's
Hmm.
uses that art form to speak to those systems underneath,
Right.
those political and cultural systems. And so I
Mm-hmm.
think that's really why I like his vibe. Same with Sinners. Now, that one, I will be honest, got me, and I wasn't sure if it was the movie or it was all the horror previews prior to that movie that got me,
Yes.
amped up.
Uh,
But fantastic movie, again, with
okay.
so many layers, the visual monsters, the vampires, but they symbolize so much more. So that might be your
Well, okay, maybe
daytime
that's
movie
my
watch.
yeah, daytime. Yes. Maybe this season I need to watch one of his because again, like you said, I've heard nothing but great stuff about his movies and maybe I should dive in. Um
Mm.
but can you tell us what happens to someone when they ignore their monster, when they just
Mm.
pretend it isn't there, Grace?
Hmm. Well, denial is a very powerful force for staying in captivity.
Mm,
Like any powerful monster or villain story, ignorance or denial actually allows the monster to lay waste to more and more territory. I mean,
mm-hmm.
you think Jurassic Park, you're talking about Jaws,
Right.
and the thing is, a monster isn't going to be choosy. A predator will take over. So much more territory is conquered, more people die, like
Mm-hmm.
chaos and abject terror reigns. So
Mm-hmm.
denial is not actually helpful.
Mm-hmm.
In the psychotherapy realm, anxiety unaddressed becomes panic and phobia.
Mm,
Anger suppressed breeds depression. Anger unharnessed evokes rage. Like
mm,
this monster
mm-hmm.
just takes control and takes over. So denial's not helpful. It actually creates more of a problem.
Yeah, and this is one of the things that I named on my sermon on Sunday is this question: How bad does it have to get
Mm, mm, mm,
before we name this thing or acknowledge that it's there? And I think it's kind of a trope of overcoming the monster stories, some of the ones that you mentioned, that there's that point in these stories where it's like, okay, how many more people on the beach need to die in Jaws
mm,
before we are
mm-hmm.
going to go and hunt this thing, right? So
Right.
yes, we want to ignore it, push it away, but maybe there comes a point where it's like we can't ignore this any longer. So, Grace, how do you actually help someone name the monster in their life? And is there something powerful about naming it out loud?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, oftentimes when clients come to me, they already have named the monster, and then
Mm,
we start to explore the damage actually caused by the monster and work towards eliminating the threat, and then the healing and restorative work can then begin.
mm,
Sometimes clients will come, they don't actually have a name for the monster, but they already know something is wrong.
right.
It be dissatisfaction in their life, unhappiness, fractured relationships, forms of addiction are already present. So they know something's on the go. And
Mm-hmm.
then the process of freedom and healing can then begin once we name the monster.
Mm-hmm.
And that in itself can be started to be freeing because it's like, okay, this is not in my head. This is not me just being paranoid. Like there's actual something actually happening here. And now I have a name for it. Okay. Now, it's also not uncommon for the fear of the unknown healed places to feel more frightening than what they're
Mm.
currently going through, the current
Ah,
pain, right? A psychological better the devil you know sort of thing,
mm-hmm.
which can absolutely get people stuck. But naming the monster, going through that healing process, all of it takes sacrifice, a commitment and determination, and safe community. That's the path to any victory or triumph.
Mm-hmm.
There is power in naming the monster out loud. Bring it out of the shadows and into the light. You can then
Mm-hmm.
fight. You can't fight what you don't know.
Right.
And so externalizing the monster can help folks then begin to face the reality of what is.
Mm.
And sometimes the monster is bigger in the dark than in the light. And remember
Hmm.
Mulan, Mushu,
Yeah,
Mushu was like,
right.
I am the very, I am. And then this teeny weeny little dragon. Like
Yeah, yeah.
sometimes what's bigger in the dark is actually so much smaller when brought to the light and surrounded by the supportive community.
Mm. Oh, that is good stuff, Grace. Yeah, absolutely. When it's lurking in the shadows there or under the surface sort of thing, it might feel more threatening than it actually is if we bring it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, let me follow up. Why are we so tempted then to turn people into monsters, right? Like I think when we're talking about systems or our own, certain challenges, but why do we have that, and what's happening inside of us when we do that?
Mm. Again, I think there are a few things on the go here, but labeling people as the monster, this is an ancient tactic used to create dominance and oppression, which
Mm.
is used to conquer people and places. We
Hmm.
gotta name the monsters, the
Yeah.
Crusades,
Hmm.
residential schools, 400 plus years of slavery, our current situation, current climate, overthrowing DEI programs. Tragically, Brad, there's so many blanks that we can fill in here. But
Mm.
what's the point? It's about dominance. It's about control. Okay. In the work that I do, specifically in the area of interventions and recovery for intimate partner violence, the
Mm.
pattern of abuse always begins with name calling,
Mm.
progresses to emotional abuse long before other forms of physical abuse begin. What's
Interesting.
that about? Because when we name someone as an other, we remove their humanity, right?
Mm.
And it's so much easier to dominate and control when someone is presumed unhuman,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
The other ways that naming monsters can be a success, naming others as monsters can be a successful tactic, is that it removes our accountability and responsibility to actually work towards
Mm.
negotiating, compromise, reconciliation, and healing, right?
Mm.
If that person is unhuman or inhuman, I don't have a responsibility to deal with this, create
Right.
openness and dialogue, right? The reality is peacekeeping is not passive. It takes sacrifice, commitment, and communities working together.
Mm. That, it struck me there as you talked about on a very micro level what happens in a relationship starts with the name calling, then might escalate to abuse. And I look at the world today and I go, oh, that happens in a single relationship, and it seems to be playing out in a larger scale.
Yes,
The way we
absolutely.
call people we disagree with names, label them, and at least in the States, is starting to spill over into
Mm-hmm.
violence, right? It's a disturbing time. But
Mm-hmm.
when we think about the storyline, one of the most haunting things, and you already alluded to this really really well a moment ago, is that if we ignore the threat, it only grows.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking, just I'm using Jaws because it's the classic one, but uh, like you said, it's under the surface there. Sometimes I find it interesting in that movie. It's almost an hour and a half. I think it's an hour and 21 minutes that the shark is not seen throughout
Mm.
on screen. And for a movie about a shark, that's a long time to not feature the actual shark.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, they don't want to deal with it. And there's
Mm.
one death. Oh, we'll just cover it up. It's beach season. Don't ruin the tourist industry. And it finally feels like it just gets to a place where they can't ignore it. And I
Mm.
feel like that's so true in our lives. We can keep pretending, keep saying it's not really a problem. Meanwhile, consequences stack up. The longer
Yes.
we delay naming, confronting, the worse the damage becomes. So let me ask you, when someone is finally ready, maybe they're at that place, they're ready to name that monster, whether it's fear, shame, addiction, what shifts, and how, you've already spoken to it a bit, but how does the act of naming change the way forward, the trajectory for a person?
What shifts?
Hmm.
The power shifts.
Hmm. Hmm.
Bringing things to the light shifts the power because now we're going way back. Do you remember the movie The Blair Witch Project?
Oh, see, that was the one that I quit. I'm off of horror movies after
Okay.
that.
So here's the funny thing is I've
Yes.
actually never seen it, but I've heard
Okay.
about it.
Yes.
And what was so powerful about that movie at the time was the psychological power that movie had. People
Mm.
were so terrified of what they thought was going to happen,
Yes.
and then there was nothing,
Yeah.
right? And I think
Yes.
that they use that same tactic with Jaws. It's like an hour and
Mm,
20 minutes, you don't actually see the shark, but people are like revved up, they're frightened and every
mm,
right, torches and pitchforks and whatever. And it's
yeah.
like it's a real monster, but the shadows create
Mm,
part of that power, that captivity psychologically, even before anything happens. And so when a person can name the monster, it shifts the power. Shadow boxing can only take us so far. It's great cardio, but you're not actually getting anywhere.
that's good.
And so to name the monster brings it into substance and focus. And when we can name the monster, the fighting strategies are then unlocked. And we
Mm,
can then systematically dismantle the strongholds.
mm,
In the psychotherapy, is it an unhealthy relationship or is it abusive?
mm,
Both require different strategies.
right.
Is it dependence or is it an addiction? Different
Mm,
strategies. Is it
mm,
clinical depression or situational depression? Different strategies. Is it racism, sexism, spiritual abuse?
mm.
Naming the monsters allows us to unlock, to know what and how to fight.
Hmm. Oh man, that was some that was some good stuff there. And you gave me some a little bit of trauma thinking back to Blair Witch. Yeah, that was the movie that I quit after with horror. But that's great stuff there. The different strategies, even between dependence and addiction, like just thinking through that is fascinating. Um, so let me get a little personal here because I've come to realize actually it was in studying kind of the storylines that I've got my own internal monsters to overcome, as we all
Mm-hmm.
do.
Yes.
Externally, though, one monster I've had to name in my own life is polarization, and I think it
Mm-hmm.
it really came to light during COVID how quickly we fell into camps, and it was just
Mm-hmm.
it felt like for a moment like, hey, here's the great crisis that's going to unite the whole globe, and then 2 months later, okay, maybe not.
Mm-hmm.
um, I
Mm-hmm.
was listening to Jad Abumrad, who's fantastic, one of my favorite journalists. He was the founder of Radio Lab, anyway, moved on, and it hasn't been the same since. But he was describing how his calling as a journalist is to be a bridge, to help be a bridge across those differences.
Mm-hmm.
And the line sort of when he talked about that, it stopped me in my tracks because it was like he put words into my own mouth about how I feel about my own calling as a pastor. And he
Mm-hmm.
said that we love to fetishize differences and how his job is to, hold the tension long enough for something new to be revealed. And so I've come
Mm-hmm.
to realize in my own role, this is not everybody's monster, but externally, I think part of my job is fighting the monster of polarization. Yours will be different, but the point is we
Mm-hmm.
each can identify something in life that we go, that is what I want to help overcome. Could
Yes.
you talk though about maybe the kinds of inner monsters that show up in people's stories? Maybe it's, I don't know, fear, shame, grief, addiction. How do what are the maybe some common ones internally that we face, and what do they do if we leave them unchallenged?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I always appreciate, Brad, when you allow yourself to be vulnerable with us. And,
Mm-hmm.
that's part of our friendship. We can be
Mm.
mutually vulnerable with each other. So I thank you. I thank you
Yeah.
for sharing that. And to be honest, I just want to also normalize that for you because we are in a cultural season where polarization is the engine that is
Mm.
driving the force of a lot of these monsters. And
Mm.
so,
Mm-hmm.
knowing that about yourself and challenging that, I think is super important.
Mm.
So, in terms of inner monsters, the thing about monsters in reality or fiction is there are rarely new ones. Long
Right.
before Hollywood started recycling storylines,
Mm-hmm.
right? King Solomon said, there is nothing new under the sun.
Mm.
And I believe all monsters have their origin story, and then over time, they strive to survive. And then we can also help adapt them to create stronger and stronger creatures of darkness. And
Mm.
this is the ongoing fight for dominance.
Mm.
Fear is always a factor to monsters. Remember that show?
Yeah.
This is again
Yeah.
going back,
Yeah.
people putting themselves in all manner of terrifying
Yes.
situations, right, to conquer their fear and make a bit of cash, right?
Right.
Capitalism
Right.
at its best,
Yes.
right? Anxiety and fear are natural emotions and they're messengers designed to keep us safe. But if we ignore the message, it will morph and evolve into something bigger. I
Mm.
talked earlier about panic, phobia, which then in itself morphs into maladaptive responses like OCD, obsessive
Mm,
compulsive disorder, which is then counterintuitive because OCD addresses the quick fix on the surface, but not the original fear. And
mm,
so, again, monster unchecked. Shame. Shame is a debilitating emotion that is actually rooted in lies. Shame says, I am bad, broken, etc. If I believe I am a wretch, thanks,
mm.
Amazing Grace,
Yeah.
right? If I believe I'm a wretch, and even some earlier lyrics say that I'm a worm, then
Mm-hmm.
where is my agency?
Mm,
That's the antithesis of who God says I am.
mm,
So let me be even more clear. Guilt is a natural and healthy emotion that cues me to the fact that I'm living outside my values.
mm-hmm.
We can talk about my inner conscience. It's life giving. If I listen to the message of guilt, which cues me to the fact that I've done something to create harm, it calls forward to accountability and reparation, right?
Mm, yeah.
Shame does not. Shame, chops me off at the psychological, emotional knees. I have no power if I'm stuck in a cycle of shame.
Mm,
So
mm-hmm.
guilt is that life, the opposite, if we can say. It's life giving. It creates freedom.
Mm,
We mentioned earlier addiction. What may have begun as a quick fix to escape heavy emotions such as shame, grief, or even trauma has now taken root into physical strongholds and then unleashes more and more chaos, not only on the self, the person addicted, but others, the ripple effects of loved ones who's trying to support someone who's in addiction, right?
mm, mm-hmm.
I really love the work of psychiatrist Gabor Mate.
Hmm.
He began his work on the east end of Vancouver. And so that's where he
Okay.
started his work and ministry to folks in addiction. But I love his work because it's his life work to help people understand that addiction is a trauma response. It's
Hmm.
not a moral failing or lack of willpower and all the other messages
Mm,
society wants to make us believe about the people over there, the othering,
hmm.
right? But again, what started as a quick fix has now morphed into a monster that seems undefeatable.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Wow, that's a lot of. There's a lot we could unpack there. That's
Hmm.
good stuff.
Hmm.
What, maybe keep going. What about relational monsters or wounds from toxic relationships, betrayals, family dysfunction? Like, how do
Hmm.
those turn? Like, that was great stuff on shame and addiction and all that stuff. Maybe keep going with
Hmm.
how
Hmm.
those turn into monsters that people carry.
Hmm. I can't help but thinking about the Hebrew creation story we know
Mm,
as Adam and Eve.
mm.
Um, they're living in paradise, but then it became a portal to the hell that we actually now live in. The ripple
Right.
effects of that continue.
Mhm.
The original wound began with self, and then immediately it festered in their relationship with each other and their relationship with God.
Yeah.
Newsflash, this is not a news story.
Yeah.
And the ripple effect goes on and on. Someone doesn't deal with their own inner demons and they multiply and spill out over onto others. Then that morphs into another form of a creature of darkness. Secrets of family abuse turn into lies and denial, which turns into more abuse, which turns into more lies and denial. Feelings
Hmm.
of shame unaddressed and guilt turn inward into more secrets, inner rage and anger manifests itself into more malicious abuse. Misery loves company, they say, and
Mm-hmm.
the cycle continues. In relationships, a relationship breaks down. The path of true healing would take time and work and facing your pain. But no, it's so much easier to get into a new relationship. And then guess what? Your
Right.
unhealed pain creates trauma for someone else who was just looking for love and acceptance. I
Mm.
mean, the cycle continues.
Mm-hmm.
When we can't or won't, whichever factor that may be, look to gain victory over our own inner monsters, we're defeated.
Hmm.
And then we also leave our community unprotected and vulnerable. And we're foolish to think we can do this alone. We
Hmm.
need safe community.
Hmm. Yeah, that really struck me as I started thinking about the different movies, that last point you made there, how often um, Jaws. The police chief wants to do it, but then he needs a marine biologist, and
Mm-hmm.
he needs the crusty old sailor. Lord of the Rings, I always come back to,
Oh,
right? Like
yes.
it's a fellowship that needs to go. It's a group of people. So
Mm-hmm.
that's some great stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Let me keep going because I'm loving hearing you sort of speak to this. Of course, then there's we've talked a lot about relational stuff. Then there's the cultural monsters, monsters that don't just whisper inside of us, but surround us, right? In the world we live
Mm-hmm.
in. Could be the relentless drive of consumerism or the pressure of productivity culture,
Mm-hmm.
the cynicism that exists in our world. They don't show up, these monsters with sharp teeth, but right, they shape
Mm-hmm.
us all the time. And then there's of course even existential monsters or illness, mortality, loneliness. Here's the truth. I think some of our monsters live under the surface internally in our hearts, and some loom over culture like giants do. But either way, I think the question, like I said, is the same that I was asking on Sunday. How bad does it have to get before we decide to fight back, to put up resistance? So I'd love to hear your thoughts, Grace,
Mm-hmm.
on some
Mm-hmm.
of these larger ones as well: consumerism, polarization, cynicism. How do these function in our lives, and what effect do they have on us?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. In the realm of psychology, there's an understanding of what is natural and what is disordered.
Hmm.
We get terms such as disorder, right?
Mm-hmm.
And all of these things in psychology are neatly cataloged in a manual called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. Short is DSM, and there's the fifth edition currently.
Mm.
All behaviors say something, right?
Mm.
So consumerism. I am a consumer of goods.
Mm-hmm.
The definition of consumerism is the preoccupation of
Mm.
society with the acquisition of consumer goods.
Mm.
So, what may begin as a natural need or desire can absolutely morph into something disordered. Do we need to
Right.
buy things? Yes, we do. Okay. Do we need a bigger house, garage, and paid for storage to house said things?
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm.
Polarization is an extreme position of one's beliefs. It's not
Mm.
balanced.
Mm.
And society wants us to be hyped up on our own arrogance and rightness and other each other.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Well, consumerism, because it
Mm.
sells magazines and papers and
Right.
locks us in our news
Right.
feeds and cycling through our algorithms,
Mm.
creating bigger and bigger monsters, not only of ourselves or our perceived monstering of each other.
Mm.
Enter cynicism, which is an inclination to believe that people are motivated purely by self interest or skepticism,
Mm.
right? Cynicism is an easier position to take if you are being bombarded by messages that the monsters are coming, right?
Right. Right.
When one is overtaken by fear, the thinking of a part of our brain literally shuts down. It doesn't work. And so we're responding in instinct and self-preservation in the reptilian part of our brain,
Mm.
just trying to survive. It's a stampede of fight and flight responses happening, Brad.
Mm.
And
Uh,
go
yeah,
ahead.
oh no, this is just so rich. I'm worried the other six plot lines won't be as rich as this one, but this is just so good. There's a lot here. Another thing that I've learned about this plot line, right, is overcoming the monster is never just about slaying something in here or out there. It's about
Mm-hmm.
how we are changed in the battle as
Yes.
well, right? There's a personal transformation that
Mm-hmm.
happens. And when we face what terrifies us, I think oftentimes we discover courage we didn't know we had. When
Mm-hmm.
we take on our addictions, we find resilience that maybe we didn't believe was possible. When
Mm-hmm.
we confront grief or despair, we find that meaning can still emerge even in dark times and moments, right? So, in other words, the monster is there to be overcome
Mm-hmm.
as it's named, but it's also something that shapes us. So, a question for you, Grace. When someone begins to do that work to face down their monster, what kind of changes do you see in people?
Hmm. I love this, Brad, and you are absolutely right. Whenever we experience an event, it's just not only our response to the event, but it's the meaning we then make of the event. And
Mm.
again, when we think about all of these triumph stories, I'm thinking of Lord of the Rings, like
Mm-hmm.
the hobbits were forever changed through that
Yes.
experience. And some of
Mm-hmm.
it was physical manifestations of change, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when a person is willing to face the monster, name the monster, and work to defeat it, greater power is actually unlocked. We
Mm.
talked about courage, which is moving forward despite the fear. It's not the absence of fear, it's
Right.
moving forward. Resilience. I survived this battle. I know I can do it again and again and again if I have to.
Mm.
Strength and resilience are actually forged through the struggle, not by
Mm.
magic and fairy dust,
Right.
right? And so, resilience, strength is unlocked, determination and perseverance, and even confidence and a belief in yourself and in the community of others
Mm.
is all part of that defeating the monster process and the transformation that happens. And
Mm.
all of those things, Brad, are shared in community, what we call synergy. We're sharing our energy and power with each other, which then can create a living, breathing wall of power.
Mm. Oh, we've already. I can't resist asking one final question of you here. We gotta do it. What practices help people hold on to hope while they're in the midst of the struggle with that monster? What keeps people from believing that their monster, whatever it is going to have the final word?
Mm-hmm. Which is this is a necessary part of the battle of defeating the monster. And
Mm.
there's a few things, Brad, but I'm going to talk about four quickly. First one is meditation.
Mm.
Meditation is creating a space where you can have stillness in order to clear the noise of doubt and anxiety from our mind and invite a groundedness for facing what must be done.
Mm.
Right? And you see that in every monster story, triumph
Mm.
story, the centering of self.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that's important are memories, a place
Mm.
to journal and record thoughts, feelings, and experiences of the past, because that past exploration reminds us of where we were, right?
Mm.
And it then becomes a compass to where we're going and guideposts to keep us on the path.
Mm.
The third thing I want to talk about is memorials. Now, this could be a journal entry, but it's powerful to have something tangible and visual to remind you of the triumph. I
Mm.
think of the Israelites wandering the wilderness. They were instructed to build markers to remind them of the miracles of God.
Right.
Because what
Right.
happens? We tend to forget once the storm is
Yeah.
past, right?
Yes.
And we forget even our own agency and how we, as well as God, showed up in miraculous ways, in powerful ways, and with the strength of our community. So it could be a stone with a word. You see a lot of
Mm.
those things.
Yeah.
It could be a tattoo. I've seen many
Huh.
of people memorialize certain things with a tattoo. It can be as unique as we are as individuals, but some
Mm.
memorial, something tangible to remind you where you've come from.
Mm.
And the other one I really like are memoirs. Now, this
Mm.
is someone else's story of success. And I
Right.
really enjoy reading autobiographies because those share the person's path in not only naming the monster, but their path of triumph. How did they
Huh.
come to be who they are? Which is why I
Uh-huh.
think we love these, rebirth stories, these monster
Mm-hmm.
stories to see
Mm-hmm.
people come out the other side. And the gospel is the good news of that and more.
Mm.
Jesus constantly put himself in the path of all of those others, right?
Mm.
The same others we still encounter today. And Jesus' work and ministry was there to showcase our humanity, to call people out of the darkness and into the divine and back into right relationship, not
Mm.
only with themselves, not only with others in community, but also with God.
Mm.
We need
Oh,
all of it. We need all of it.
Grace, today I gotta say you're playing the role of preacher
I feel like
real
I was
well.
preaching
I
with
you know
way.
yeah I'm loving it. No, this has been so good. At the end of the day, like the whole idea is that the gospel, the Jesus past story, is an overcoming the monster story as well, and
Hmm.
it's very clear from our conversation today that we can find ourselves in that story. So God and
Yes.
Jesus confronts the monsters that haunt humanity, evil, sin, death itself, doesn't look away. Instead, Jesus goes straight into the darkness, comes out the other
Hmm.
side. And I
Hmm.
find the way he wins instructive. It's not through brute force, it's through courageous, self-giving love. And I think there's an
Yes.
invitation for us to live inside that same story, name the monsters that haunt us, find the courage to face them, and to trust that love, not fear, not shame, not death, gets the final word. So,
Mm-hmm.
Grace, this has been a fun journey. As we close today, maybe for our listeners, just ask yourself, what's the monster I need to name? And
Mm.
what might happen if I could find the courage with God's help to face it? So let's think about that. And Grace, thank you for just so much wisdom and insight today. It was fantastic.
Thanks, Brad. Much appreciated. Thanks to our listeners, and we'll see you next time.